Good evening and welcome to the annual Marshfield CRS PPI Committee's annual Marshfield presentation about flood insurance, floodplain management, building code regulations, and everything else you could want to know about flood issues here in the town of Marshfield. This does give us credit for our CRS program here in town, which you, as the residents of Marshfield, are receiving the benefit from, along with the resiliency that the town has for implementing CRS. So here's a review of the committee. I'm going to go around and introduce each member who's here tonight. Not all members are participating tonight, but the major town and local stakeholders are. So we'll start with my left with Andrew Stewart.
I'm Andrew Stewart. I'm the building commissioner and floodplain manager for the town of Marshfield.
I'm Greg Guimond. I'm the town planner.
My name is Michael Moresco, and I'm the town administrator for the town of Marshfield.
My name is Nancy Periker. I'm the zoning administrator and CRS coordinator for the town of Marshfield.
Great. Thank you all, and thank you all for being here. The mission of the PPI committee, its PPI CRS committee, is to create and implement a PPI plan, which we will talk about tonight, and to work with the town, FEMA, and other stakeholders to implement and carry out the activities of the community rating system. So, what is the community rating system? Well, CRS has several main goals. Reduce and avoid flood damage to insurable property, strengthen and support the insurance aspects of the NFIP, and foster cooperative floodplain management. But to really get a definition of what CRS is, its main purpose is to support the National Flood Insurance Program. So in order to do this, the CRS program provides flood insurance premium rate discounts, which Marshfield is receiving, to NFIP policyholders in recognition of the fact that their communities implement activities that exceed the minimum NFIP requirements and that work towards the three goals of CRS. Included in this support are measures that credit protection to life and property during a flood. So, Marshfield currently has a CRS rating of 7. This is one of the best CRS ratings in the state of Massachusetts, giving NFIP policyholders in the high-risk A and V flood zones in town a 15% discount on their flood insurance policy. That 15% discount started October 1st of 2020 for all policies that were written or renewed on or after that date. Marshfield has been as high as a 20% in the mid-90s, which just goes to show our history with CRS. We have such a rich history with the program. And so throughout this outreach and other flood awareness activities, Marshfield will continue to increase our rating. And you can see on the screen is a display of the different ratings, how low and high they can go. So a Class 7 is certainly working our way up on the CRS class rankings. So with that, I'm going to let Mike Moresco, our town administrator, give a couple quick words about CRS and the town of Marshfield.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank people for tuning in. I think anyone that lives by the ocean or by any water, it's very important that you tune in and learn some interesting information about CRS. The town's worked really hard, especially Joe Flood Rossi and the committee, to make sure that our residents are protected, that they have access to the insurance, and most importantly, because of all the educational tools that the committee has put together as public information, those folks that need the insurance get the insurance as a discount.
Thank you, Mike. So with that introduction, we're going to be going over a few key topics. As Mike mentioned, this is a critical element for our community since we are flood prone. That's nothing new to those that live and have been around Marshfield. So we need to know our flood hazards. We need to insure property for flood. We need to protect people from the hazard, and we need to protect property from the hazard. We need to build responsibly. We need to have our natural floodplains function. We need to understand the drainage system maintenance that you can do as residents of the town, and how to document storm damage and why that's so important. And we're also going to be discussing flood infrastructure management, things that you can do and that the town is doing to manage our coastal infrastructure. So let's talk a little bit about knowing your flood hazard. Obviously, nor'easters cause the most flood hazard in Marshfield. Nor'easters were identified in the town of Marshfield's hazard mitigation plan as the number one cause of number one disaster in the town of Marshfield. Nor'easters can occur at any time of the year, but are more prevalent in the winter months. Obviously, every September, October, we get ourselves prepared for those nor'easters that can bring snow and severe coastal flooding. And while a hurricane may last for hours, like we saw recently with Tropical Storm Elsa, which lasted about 8 to 12 hours, nor'easters can last for days, with at least one high tide, and we've seen the last several years it's been multiple high tides, at its peak, resulting in the most severe flooding. So before the storm threatens, know your flood risk. So throughout tonight's presentation, you're going to see links and you're going to see ways to get information online. This presentation is available at the Town of Marshfield website under the PPI CRS Committees page. When you search for that page, it's actually on the Town of Marshfield's homepage on the quick links section. So there you'll find most of the resources we're talking about tonight. So find out your flood risk by checking the flood maps, and they are located online. And we recently had some changes to those maps. And again, the link is found on the PPI CRS committee page. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe there's a link on the town's quick links as well, right on the homepage. The Ventris Library or Planning Department has flood risk information. We actually, because of CRS, here at the library, actually do have a section for all of our flood risk information, which includes copies of flood maps, flood risk manuals, copies of old flood maps and the new ones as well. Also, contact your insurance agent. Insurance agents are a primary source for your information about your specific building's flood insurance. And also visit, again, the Town of Marshfield's Program for Public Information and CRS webpage. Again, this presentation is online there, along with a bunch of other great resources. So, know your flood hazard. 40% of Marshfield is in a special flood hazard area. You know, I found, and I know our committee did with putting these statistics together, how stark our flood risk really is here in the town of Marshfield. 40% of the town being in a special flood hazard area is a significant area. You can see behind me is a map showing all the areas that are in our special flood hazard area. The SFHA, which is that area that's designated A or V, has the zones VE, AE, AO, and A. Those are the high-risk zones found in the town of Marshfield. In these flood zones, flood insurance is required if you have a federally backed mortgage. Marshfield has 149, and that number is higher now, repetitive loss properties. 19, and I know this number is higher too, are severe repetitive loss properties. 137 of these properties are single-family residential, 4 are multifamily residential, 6 are commercial, and 1 is a public service building. So know the repetitive loss areas. And in the map on the screen, you'll see the shaded blue areas are those repetitive loss areas. So there are more. So what the town has done and what towns are required to do, cities and towns, are to designate areas of high risk to be called repetitive loss areas. So these can be extremely helpful when identifying how high or risky, how high your flood risk is by looking to see if your building falls into one of those areas. Marshfield has other areas than repetitive loss areas or FEMA flood zones that flood. I don't think it's any mystery that if we drive around town during a nor'easter, there are areas that flood. Just by us driving around, we can see them. Several areas in Marshfield that commonly flood, even in non-flood events. I think this is critical. Rainfall events can cause flooding in our town as well. And we see where those areas are, again, when we're driving around town. But what we've done is in the map, again, the map that you see on the screen has actually gone through, the town has gone through and mapped those areas of known flooding, plus some areas of potential flooding. So these are areas not designated as repetitive loss areas that still are known to flood. And FEMA estimates that 40%, the number is probably realistically higher than this, of flood losses come from areas that are not considered special flood hazard areas. So again, you can see on the map here that some of the areas that are known to flood are not part of Marshfield's high-risk flood zone. Now, map information service is available at the building department, and with me here is Andrew Stewart, who is the building commissioner and floodplain manager for the town of Marshfield. Now, Andrew, if somebody comes to your department, how can they get information about their flood risk?
Well, they can get it through a number of ways. One thing that we have been doing for a lot of residents over the past year, especially since the map change, is providing them with a letter giving them an official determination of what flood zone they are in. They can take that letter to their mortgage company and their insurers and let them know that their flood risk has changed. Either they've been removed from the flood zone, or maybe their flood zone has increased as a result of the map change, but their rates will be affected based on that information. They can take that information to their insurers. So we encourage everybody who's in a flood zone to reach out to the building department, get that letter of determination stating exactly what flood risk and flood zone you are in. And that's a great starting point. And from there, we have a wealth of resources, anywhere from all of the FEMA technical bulletins on floodplain construction, which we have in the building department. We also have copies of them here at the library. And we've got all the building codes and any construction standards related to floodplain management and floodplain construction are available at the building department and also here at the library.
Awesome. And that is the great thing about CRS is we are, to get more points, we've got to have the information available in more places. So you'll find that not only are the information available physically, but also a lot of it available online. It's just more available for you to find out. And we're going to talk a little later about why it's critical to get the information right. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. But first, let's talk about insuring the property for flood. So FEMA estimates that 40% of losses come from the low-risk zones. We did just discuss that. But did you know that homeowners insurance, for the most part, will not cover flood damage? Now, when we talk about flood damage, we're talking about the definition of flood, which is basically, if we think about it simply, water coming onto your property from off of your property over land. So we're not talking about pipe burst in your house. We're not talking about seepage through the foundation unless that seepage was caused directly by a flood. But for the most part, it's going to be that overland movement of water that floods your property. And homeowners will not cover that. Flood coverage can be purchased from the federal government or a private insurer. There are now over 200 private companies selling flood insurance across the country. A separate policy from standard homeowners insurance is required for protection against flood because the flood policy is going to be separate from your homeowners since homeowners does not cover flood. You can also buy a contents-only insurance, flood insurance policy for renters. So if you're a renter in town or you have a condo and you want to insure your personal property, you can buy a contents-only policy for those types of occupancies. Now, for most policies, there is a 30-day wait from the NFIP, which is the federal insurance program. Most private programs have a 7 or 14-day wait. But if you have a loan closing, the 30-day wait is waived for the effective date of your loan closing. So in that case, you don't have a 30-day wait. But here's the key. Do not rely on disaster assistance. And I think this number is quite stark as well. The average flood insurance payout in Hurricane Harvey, was $106,000. But the average disaster assistance payout in Hurricane Harvey was only $6,000. So it's critical that flood insurance be your financial tool to recovery after a storm. Now, we have a piece here about choosing deductibles and also about keeping your receipts after a flood. We're not going to go through all the information here, but the key points here are, when you choose your deductible, just know that it's going to be the amount that you pay out of pocket for your claim. So for a 1 to 4 family building, deductibles go from $1,000 to $10,000. So do you want a high dollar deductible? That means you would be paying more out of pocket for your loss. But some people do opt to do that, and they think about flood insurance as more of a catastrophic type of insurance. Or if you choose a lower deductible, that works too. But just know that the more claims that you file, the higher your premium will be. And also, when there is a storm, keep your receipts for damage, and keep your receipts for the new things you buy in case of damage, because that is what your adjuster will be asking for in a loss, and keeping those receipts will prove that you purchased something. So what is covered by flood insurance? What is not covered? So there's an endless number of things that flood insurance does cover, but there are some things that flood insurance does not cover. And we're going to talk about that in the next slide here. So what is insured under the building property coverage? So that's going to be your foundation walls, your central air systems, drywalls, your electrical outlets and switches, furnaces, water heaters. These are the things that are covered by your building policy. So the way that we like to talk about it in insurance terms is take your house, shake the house, and everything that comes out is your contents. Everything that is inside is your building. And for the most part, flood will cover all of those items, except when we talk about basements, crawl spaces, and enclosures. There is extremely limited coverage for these areas. So think about your first livable floor has a lot of coverage. Anything below that most likely doesn't. So for flood insurance, things that are covered for building in your basement are your critical machineries, drywall that's finished drywall, but it won't pay to refinish it. It'll just pay for the drywall. It will pay for cleanup and debris removal. We'll actually talk about why that's a key coverage in a minute here. And for contents items in your foundation, it's going to cover washers and dryers, food freezers, and the food in them, but not refrigerators. So they have to be food freezers only, and portable window air conditioners in the window, plugged in and functioning. So what is not insured under a flood policy? Well, there's several key items here. Property belongings outside of a building. So you will not get coverage for your trees, plants, septic systems, walks, decks, patios. And key here is if you leave your contents outside, so lawn chairs, that type of thing, no coverage. Seawalls, hot tubs, swimming pools, no coverage. Living expenses such as temporary housing, that could be found on a private flood policy but is not found on an NFIP policy. But key here, like we mentioned before, is cleanup and debris removal is covered. And I've been in situations with ride-alongs with claims adjusters where the claim was only cleanup and debris removal. So just know that if you have a flood loss and you've got water in your foundation and a deck in your coming through your back wall, just know that flood insurance policies will cover that loss as long as it qualifies as a flood. And flood insurance can be cheap. I think there's a misconception that flood insurance is extremely expensive. While it certainly can be expensive, the average cost of a flood insurance policy is $950. And if you live in the floodplain, there is a 26% chance that you will be flooded during a 30-year mortgage versus a 9% chance of having a fire in the same time. So you have a better chance of having a flood than a fire. 30% of flood claims come from those low-risk flood zones. So the number 40% or 30%, it's a high number. A preferred risk policy is available in these low-risk areas. The number's increased a little bit. It's $500 a year for a premium plus fees and surcharges. It's about a $600 policy. But talk to your insurance agents about that. And CRS we do have a guide for realtors and real estate professionals. So you can actually get it on the website as a download. We also send that brochure out once a year to all real estate offices and lending offices in the town of Marshfield. So just know that that brochure will automatically be given to your respective real estate offices. All right, so let's talk about protecting people from the hazard. So, flood events not only cause damage to property, but threaten life too. So how many times have we seen on the television? Unfortunately, we get usually primetime news when the National Guard has to come and rescue somebody from their home. So make sure that you listen to those emergency instructions that are given to you before there's an event. Nor'easter and hurricane warnings provide you time to lessen the damage to your property and properly evacuate. Do things such as refill your needed prescriptions. And you can see on the left side of the screen here, there are FEMA manuals on retrofitting homes, getting your building protected. We have resources on our website, and we also have the building commissioner here who has already mentioned the resources available in your office.
And not just that, Joe, but also for specific, if we're expecting a storm and people have specific questions about methods of protecting, say, their windows or blocking up things, or even temporary flood-proofing measures, which are available through FEMA, temporary flood-proofing walls and different things that can help protect. I've got information on that, and as well as can just give practical advice on boarding things up and whatnot, having lived in here and been doing it here for a while.
Yeah, and I think that's something that is critically important to highlight is, living in a community that has flood risk, it's great for about 360 days of the year, and we have those 5 to 10 days where things are difficult, and it's really important to protect your property during those times. Do things such as check battery-powered equipment and buy extra batteries. Fuel your car to prevent flying glass, which we just talked about. Board up your windows or protect with storm shutters well ahead of the storm. I always find it funny where, we have people that are trying to put boards up or get their shutters closed the morning that the storm's moving in. So make sure you do that ahead of time. Bring outdoor possessions inside or tie down securely. This may be a good opportunity to highlight from whoever wants to mention it, the critical importance of abiding by our DPW's roadblocks when those happen. Because of the unfortunate last year, the only rescue we had was somebody who decided to drive through water, Mike.
I'll jump in, and what Joe's saying is really true. DPW's out there really to protect everybody, and they are forecast by the police. They already know which streets are underwater, which people shouldn't be driving through to protect themselves, so their car doesn't stall out. Then the police and fire have to go and rescue them, instead of being able to rescue someone that, can't get out of their house because the water's up on their front porch, things like that. So DPW works hand in hand with, as part of public safety, with the fire department, police department, trying to secure a pathway away from where the water is, whether it's on the riverside or whether it's on the ocean side. So it's important, really, during the storms, the northeasters, hurricanes, that and just everyday normal heavy rainstorms, that people really listen to what public safety has to say.
Yeah. And Andrew, go right ahead.
Question on the rescues count, or count against us?
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you, Greg, for mentioning that. Rescues of our citizens, while they're obviously done, will actually count against us for CRS credit. It was one of those things that we discovered during our annual review of our plan for public information when we had to actually record the number of rescues and show improvement. Well, it's difficult to show improvement when we're out there doing rescues. 0 would be a great number. So again, make sure that not only will this affect our community from sending people out to try to rescue you and affect the searchers and the rescuers, but also it affects our credits towards supplying that 15% discount. So just keep that in mind as well. That's a really great point.
And Joe, one other point, if I may.
Sure.
People should take the warnings. Our public safety people, police and fire are very good about getting on. We're very fortunate. We have WATD in town. They go on there ahead of time about the storm. They can tell by the potential of the storm how much damage, how much flooding there's going to be. And, the police and fire will put out warnings to people that are in those prone areas that flood to really, make arrangements. Call a friend, call a neighbor that lives somewhere another place in town or another town, and evacuate yourself so that you don't put yourself into a situation where you need to be rescued at the height of the storm or at the height of the flooding.
And that brings us right into what we were going to talk about now, which is our emergency shelter. So if you're going to shelter, make arrangements for all pets to be safe. So if you have to go to a shelter, take a survival kit. And those survival kits, it's really good to get those done well ahead of the storm. The sunny days where there's no storm coming, get those survival kits made. So do it now. Alcohol or weapons of any kind are not allowed in the shelters. Follow instructions of shelter workers. Stay in the shelter until local authorities tell you it is safe to return home. Pets are allowed as long as cages are provided. Maybe this is a good time to talk about our shelter. I don't know the last time we activated one, but where is that shelter usually held?
So, Joe, you have a couple of places that we can use at shelter. So we normally can use the EOC, we can use the senior center and the Furnace Brook School. So those are primarily the shelters. It depends about the duration. If it's a multi-day duration, then we would need to use a slightly bigger location because the longer people are there in groups, you want people to have some private space. So we work collaboratively with the schools on the Furnace Brook. The Carroll opens up the senior center. All of our buildings have generators. We bring in food, we bring in blankets, we have cots so that people can sleep. And if it's a really short duration, we open up the EOC.
Great. And you can see on the screen the shelter prep kit, some of the key items to make sure you bring. Because, we can't, the shelter cannot supply you with your medication. They can't supply you with your eyeglasses. So make sure you have that stuff prepared to take with you. So, if there is an emergency, you will be notified in one of more of the following warning signals. In significant events, a reverse 911 call is made from the town to you. There could be a notification on your television or radio. And in fact, as Mike mentioned, there's the emergency information. At the bottom of the screen, you can actually see the radio stations that information is broadcasted on. Notifications online by town or local news sites. As been mentioned here several times, our EOC gives a lot of great updates. So if you're paying attention to that type of information, then you're going to be ahead of the curve. And you can see there the following suggestions. Pay attention to the different emergency notifications that are going on. Listen to the radio and television. Learn the school and daycare center, your child's school or daycare center, and your work's emergency plans. These storms don't have a timeline they follow. They can happen at any time. I mean, how many times have we had to let school out early because we had a snow start earlier than we thought? I mean, these things happen. So know what to do in various scenarios. Also, in Marshfield, we have evacuation routes, and you're going to need to know how to get out of your house if you have to evacuate. And decide on a location to meet when an emergency happens. Again, these emergency situations happen at times when we're not all together. And post all emergency plans and numbers at home, somewhere where everyone can see what to do. So the emergency information and instructions will be given to you, and you can see one of the storm signs there, winter storm watch. I mean, the town of Marshfield and our locality in general, the South Shore, does a great job at putting out the information. When will the storms be coming, the duration of those storms, when to get out of your house. You'll be advised of any actions that you may be directed for your protection and safety. After you have been alerted, tune your radio to one of the following stations that we had on the prior page. And make a list of emergency numbers and identify a safe place to go. And a lot of this information has been taken off the Red Cross website, and you can see redcross.org. I mean, they really have a lot of great information. There may even be some of this emergency planning information available in one of the offices at Town Hall. So when we start to talk about protecting property, a lot of this information is found between zoning, planning, and building, which is why they're all represented here tonight. So again, we talked about this earlier, but check the maps. So you can go to Marshfield. There's instructions here on how to look at the maps. The link for this is, rather than following these instructions, just go to the town website under the quick links and click the flood map. However, as Andrew mentioned earlier, their office, their department can help you with more information about your specific building and all the different scenarios that you may be asking yourself about flood risk, construction questions, and the various information like that. Things such as move hazardous material out of basements, sheds, or other areas that may be flooded. Too many times we see those areas flooded and somebody had stored all their most meaningful belongings right on the floor in the basement or crawl space. So get those things elevated. And of course, elevate your building. There is no substitute to getting a building elevated in terms of protecting your property. So this can be done with funds from increased cost of compliance, which is found in your flood insurance policy, Traditional lending options are the FEMA Federal Mitigation Assistance Program grants. Does anyone want to comment on anything so far here?
I think the one comment I would say when we talk about elevating your building, and this is something I tell a lot of residents, is, you know, for years there was a effort to try to get away from the substantial improvement designation and try to phase work out so that they wouldn't have to elevate the house, and there was always an effort to avoid it. And the problem with that is you're spending tens and possibly hundreds of thousands of dollars to improve your house. And all it's going to take after that is one storm to undo everything, and your investment will be lost. So elevating the structure is really about protecting your investment and making sure that that investment is going to be protected from flood damage. It's you know, it really is, when you look at the long term of this, elevating the house is really the first step into long-term savings when it comes to flood damage.
That couldn't be a better parlay into the next part of our presentation, which we'll get to in just a second. Before we get there, you know, here's a checklist for your house, your storm protection checklist: flashlights, duct tape, water, all the things that a radio, all the things that you need to protect your home. So when we talk about building responsibly, that is a perfect segue into this section. You know, all properties in our A or V zone on a flood insurance map are subject to our floodplain regulations. And Andrew, Greg, Nancy, Mike, we can all attest to the fact that FEMA is not getting more lax with these regulations. They are only getting more stringent with them. Therefore, the town, and we'll get into it in a moment, is becoming more strict and following the regulations more to the letter than the town has ever done before because of this. And it's really done to benefit our community. So before undertaking development, and we cannot emphasize this enough, and if you are in an A or V zone, and if you don't know, go to the building department, you or your builder must contact the building department and the Conservation Commission. My recommendation is to start with buildings, since they can give you that map information, understand what has to be done there, but make sure no work is done until you have a building permit and have gone through the other necessary permitting processes, which we'll talk about in just a minute. The zoning board and board of health may also be necessary for you to build your structure. So, Andrew, I think now might be an appropriate time to talk about the new floodplain permit that the town is working to implement.
Certainly.
And how that relates to the importance of building in compliance.
Certainly. At the town meeting this spring, we passed update to the floodplain regulations, and in that is contained the floodplain permit. So the floodplain permit is for any development activity in a flood zone. This could include anything from minor landscaping activities of soil disturbances, placement of fences and accessory structures such as sheds, to new construction, additions, and things like that. So it really covers the full gamut of any sort of development activity in the flood zone. And our vision for the floodplain permit is really to give the residents of Marshfield a roadmap for how they should attack going about getting their development activity done in the floodplain. So what the floodplain permit is designed to do is essentially you'll approach it and give your description of what it is, the activity that you want to do. And based on that application, we will then make a determination of which boards and regulations you need to satisfy in order to do that. So, for example, a new home, if you're going to be demolishing an existing structure and building a new home on that lot, let's say, for example, it's a non-conforming lot. It's a 6,000 square foot lot down in Wrexham. And so basically I would get that application and I would be able to make the determination of which flood zone it's in, and that you are going to need to talk to the historical commission because the structure is over 75 years old and you're going to need a permit from them to demolish it. You're going to need to get a permit from the Conservation Commission because of the activity is going to be subsurface disturbance in one of their jurisdictional areas. You're going to need to get zoning board approval because of an alteration or extension or reconstruction of a non-conforming structure. And then depending on whether you're town sewer or private septic system, you may require Board of Health. So what it'll do is essentially give you the roadmap for the different boards and approvals that you're going to need in order to do that activity, which we found in the past is, could be a problem for some people. They might get approval from one board, say zoning or Concom, but then they might not understand, well, we need to go get a building permit as well for this activity. So what it's going to do essentially is bring it all together into one place so that we can ensure that for any specific project or activity in a flood zone, all the bases are being covered, all the regulations are being met, and all the boards are being satisfied as far as that activity. And we can also use it as a tool to make sure that all the compliance for all those boards is met before the floodplain permit is officially completed and satisfied. So it really will encapsulate everything and make sure that the town of Marshfield is fully in compliance with the regulations.
It will also remove any surprises.
Yeah, no more surprises. That's the big thing, is giving that roadmap. So it's very upfront. People will know the expenses that are gonna go into the site plan that they're gonna need, the elevation certificate, all that stuff. And so they'll get it upfront. They'll know what the elements are that are gonna need to go into that site plan so that they only have to go one time to their engineer and get that one site plan that will satisfy everything, one time to the abutters list, all of these things to satisfy the different boards.
And Joe, I just want to jump in and say, I think it's important, Andrew, our building commissioner and floodplain manager, put a lot of information out there. And people shouldn't be afraid to call if they have questions. Andrew would rather answer the questions on the front side of the project than to have people do projects that are non-compliant. And then, he has to
Then have
go
the
in
real
there
hard
and
discussions,
real hard discussions, and people are gonna have to spend extra money because the project wasn't done the first. And his goal is really to protect the homeowner and to make sure that they're gonna be safe wherever they live in the town.
And I couldn't emphasize that last part enough. This is not being done to make people frustrated about another layer. This is to not only make sure the process goes more smooth, but it's also to keep our community safer. If your neighbor is trying to put 50 yards of fill on their property, and that's not allowed by the floodplain permits or the floodplain bylaws, then that needs to be vetted out before it's done versus the heartache that can happen after. And that's an example of one of the reasons that this is such a critical element for our community.
Yeah, I think one of the things is it's with floodplain regulations, it's not just about protecting your own property. It's also about protecting the property and lives of your surrounding neighbors as well, because the example Joe just gave of adding fill to one property will cause floodwater displacement into neighboring properties and cause more damage to those properties. Having a shed on your property that's not compliant, doesn't have the flood openings, isn't properly secured to the ground, in a flood, that can get picked up and moved, and now that smashes into the neighbor's house and causes damage to them, or takes out a fence and other things. So we really have to start thinking in terms of those, what are the obstructions, what are the potential damages that can occur based on the things that are being done on these properties.
And if there are questions, as Mike and everybody here has mentioned, really Andrew is pioneering and starting this process for us. So I would say the building department is going to be your number one spot to start to say, hey, I have a question about the floodplain permit, so what do I do?
Okay, no problem, I'll take it.
It's probably a good place to start anyways, since they need to know what zone they're in and things that they need to be doing in their floodplain. So on that topic, development activities subject to the regulations or any changes to improved or unimproved lots are exactly what we're regulating by our bylaws. And by the way, these bylaws are not bylaws Marshfield just created because we want to have a better floodplain. This is the federal minimum standard for us to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program and CRS. Marshfield authorities may levy a fine and/or obtain a court order to have the owner correct the construction if built without a permit or if not built in accordance with approved plans. So again, the floodplain permit is hopefully going to avoid those issues by addressing them up front. And of course, build responsibly with substantial improvement or substantial damage. This is another place that all communities in our country have had some discrepancies with, that here on the South Shore and specifically in Marshfield, we're working to get a lot better on the clarity around substantial improvement of substantial damage. So you can read what substantial improvement is: basically the cost of reconstruction, rehabilitation, addition, or improvements to a building that equals or exceeds 50% of the building's market value before construction commences. But you can see here the biggest part is this flow chart here, where really you start with the damage is done or the improvement is done. The adjuster sends claim estimate to the community. The permit is applied for by the resident. The community requests detailed estimate of the work, and the SISD determination is made. So these are being made, they are being enforced, and they will continue to be enforced to make sure our community is protected.
One thing I'd like to add real quick about the 50% thing is a common misconception is the cost. Sometimes the misconception is that it's the cost of the overall property, including the structure. The 50% is just on the structure, and it's only if you get a private appraisal. It's either based off of the public appraisal that the assessor's office does, or you can get a private appraisal, and it's based on the depreciated cost of improvements. It's very important to understand that it's on the depreciated cost of improvements is what the substantial improvement determination will be based off of.
Okay, perfect. So you heard it from the person making those determinations right here. So what about our natural floodplain functions? And we sure do have a lot of beautiful natural functioning floodplains. You can see an example of several of them there. So, in order to protect them, we encourage boaters not to speed while traveling on local rivers and creeks. This can cause erosion to our marsh banks. I know regionally this has been a bigger issue with the erosion of our marshes. Wrecks and beachgoers should be careful to travel only on the designated pathways through the dunes. Luckily, Marshfield has had a long history of protecting our dunes, planting grass in our dunes, and so we do maintain those dunes for a reason. Walking on any dune vegetation weakens the protection factor of the dune, which can increase the risk of flood damage. So I know a lot of our local communities struggle with this. Marshfield has done a really good job at protecting our dunes and beaches, so let's continue to work together to try to protect them. And then under Title V, it is recommended that you pump your septic system once a year to keep it functioning correctly and prevent pollution to local marshlands and waterways. So that's what we don't want to have happen. So drainage system maintenance. There's things the town does and there's things you can do in order to help protect our what we would call urbanized flooding, our flooding from our street storm drains. It's probably the most common type of unreported flooding is from our storm drains. Streams, channels, catch basins, detention and retention basins, they can lose, as we can see in the fall with the leaves falling on them, they can lose a lot of their carrying capabilities as a result of dumping debris or having leaves or other things clog them. When a drainage system loses a portion of its carrying or storage capacity, overbank flooding occurs and roads can flood, and we see that fairly often in communities across the country. Dumping in streams or other bodies of water, including wetlands, is a violation of Marshfield regulations and is subject to a fine. So no, don't dump because in our drainage ditches and other places, because it can cause flooding problems. And then simple things that you can do to help protect and help us maintain those is report areas that are blocked to the DPW, and also clean the storm drains in front of your house and remove leaves and debris from them. Storm documentation. So, even if you don't file a claim, you should still document storm damage to your property or your area. And now, I believe the EOC has a drone they now fly up and down, right? Is that correct?
That is correct, Joe.
Yeah.
So we, when we have those bad storms, what the insurance carrier that insures us requires that at the beginning of the winter season, we take the drone, fly it up and down to take a picture of the condition at our seawalls are in, any of the ripraps in, so, and then after a storm, and we know that there's damage, then it goes, the drone is flown again, and then they have the picture before and after, then they can decide, how much federal funding they want to give us to help assist the homeowner or help and assist the town if it's town-owned land.
And that's a huge benefit for exactly those reasons, because I know there have been communities that have struggled to try to prove that there was damage done to their coastal infrastructure or other parts of the town, and we certainly have solved that issue.
We also, sorry, we
No, go right
also
ahead.
have, in the building department, we have FEMA-approved damage documentation forms as well.
Perfect. So, doing those types of assessments are critical. Again, even if it's not going to cause you a claim, it could very well help protect your property in the long run by showing and explaining to the community that there was damage done and over time that can cause damage to your property. So document other important information about the damage that will help us document that damage, and that type of stuff can be sent to the CRS PPI committee to report damage. So after a storm, this is a cool little graphic that shows you different things to do once a storm happens, but I don't think we can emphasize enough, whether there's a claim or not, to take pictures of not only the damage to the property, to the building, but also the land and the property around you. So here's a quick little guide on what to do before, during, and after a storm. So before a storm, do things like we talked about, such as make a list, inventory of valuables, create a household emergency plan, and have an emergency kit. Those things need to be done well in advance of our storm season. Have a copy of your insurance policy and contact information on hand. That's going to be very important to have easily accessible if you have a claim. During the storm, well, a lot of the times it's find higher ground or leave if possible. Avoid walking or driving through floodwaters. Again, cannot emphasize that enough. Turn off your gas and electricity if possible to avoid fires. And then after a storm, return home only when you've been given the okay from officials if your area has been blocked. I know we do have some areas in town that are blocked off for some time after a storm. Boil water for drinking and food prep until authorities say otherwise if there is a boil water order. Avoid down power lines and standing water. That's another critical element because lines easily come down, especially in our coastal areas. And then again, take pictures of damaged items, property, and contact your agent.
Joe, I just want to stress again real quick, the avoiding driving through floodwaters, okay? Especially because we did have the rescue that counted against us this year. The thing about driving through floodwaters is we have some very deceptive areas in town, especially down in Brant Rock and down along Plymouth Ave, kind of down in the low end of Plymouth Ave. It seems people always look at it and feel they can get through, and they can't because it's very deceptive. There are a couple of real low spots in those areas, and people always get stuck. So I can't stress again, when we have the DPW trucks out there and they are blocking the way, please do not go around them.
That cannot be emphasized enough. And one of the critical elements to that is not just you, but tell your friends from other places that come to Marshfield, because those seem to be the individuals.
We get a lot of what they call gapers. They're staring at the waves and the damage and the wind and everything else, and it's exciting. It's fun to watch for sure. But you've got to be aware of your surroundings and the risk.
People that may not have observed nor'easters or coastal storms, I don't think, really truly understand that when we see those waves on TV going over our seawall, the power that wave has when it reaches the ground.
And the debris it brings, too.
And the debris. In that wave is rocks and other things, pieces of buildings and decks and stuff that can cause significant damage to not just property, but you and your car trying to get through that water.
Or sitting under it watching the waves.
Exactly. So
It sweep you right out. That's what people don't understand, is they get out of their vehicle. First of all, they park their vehicle right along the ocean. The waves are pounding, stones are pounding off the hood of their car. Then they decide they want to get out to get a better look or take a photograph. And, people have been lucky. We've had to warn people to get back into their cars immediately. They're out there and the waves are coming down, tearing the porch off of houses, and they're standing out there thinking it's it's okay, and it's
Yeah.
very,
And
very
those,
dangerous.
those waves launch rocks and serious rocks that can take
Absolutely.
somebody out, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, and that is probably the biggest misconception, is we look at the waves and go, oh, look at all that water, but in there are a lot of things, and the waves are so powerful. It's been, a couple years since we've had a storm that's, taken houses and other infrastructure away, but that happens, and that's how
And you have
powerful.
that debris included.
Exactly, exactly. I remember, just as an aside, in the 2018 storms in Situate, I remember being in Situate before the storm and seeing the deck on a coastal home, and the next day going after the storm, and about 1,000 feet away, that deck was on somebody's front lawn. I mean, that's just how fast the water can move those items.
Oh, and the other thing too is if anyone who is familiar with Brant Rock during those 2018 storms and some of those streets that run parallel with the ocean, right down in the Esplanade area, the cobble was piled 3 or 4 feet high. They had to
Yeah.
bring front-end loaders to open up those streets. That's how much of the rocks and debris and sand came in.
Come down. So it's critical, cannot emphasize that enough. So we do have coastal infrastructure in Marshfield. I mean, it's a major element of our coastline. So our flood it's critical to protecting our community. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
So Joe, on that one,
Yes.
we have the dike, which is a unique feature in Marshfield, in this state. It is a polder. Without that dike, we'd have a lot more houses and the airport flooded in every storm. You also have the seawalls, which that's what most people think of.
Yep.
The revetment, but we also have things called floodgates or flood flaps, which are important to keep clean. And then you have the simple street drain system, as you mentioned, which is as critical to keep clean. So, and remember, the DPW is out trying to keep people from driving into, flood hazard areas, helping evacuate people, trying to do emergency fixes. If there are simple things like getting the leaves out of the catch basin, et cetera, in your neighborhood, by all means, do those simple fixes to help out.
The other thing to mention too is during these nor'easters, especially during the winter, the DPW is also out there on the rest of town cleaning up the streets, plowing, putting down salt, and doing all the other things that they need to do. So they're doing a lot during these storms.
And these are the things that you can do, and that's, I think, the biggest part of this slide is the things, it's not just, coastal infrastructure, of course. When we replace a piece of it, it's like we've got construction crews in, it takes a lot of work, but there are small things, as was just mentioned, that you can do to continue to protect your property and the town from continued damage after a storm. So if you live near a seawall, call the DPW if you see cracks or deterioration. And again, that's where the photographs become important to document that type of issue to make sure that the town can address it. Something that has become a bigger issue over time that we're trying to address more and more is avoid putting hard concrete patios or structures up against the seawall. That causes two big issues. One, it causes scour, which is the removal of sediment away from the seawall in a storm. But it also causes those hard structures to go into your structure. They can be lifted, they can be moved. So avoid that. Avoid bolting structures directly to the seawall, which can cause the seawall to deteriorate. I mean, all you have to do is look at a seawall after a storm, and the rocks have pelted and put little dings in it, so you drilling into the seawall or putting something on it can also add to that deterioration. These all help contribute to keeping us safe, keeping our coastal infrastructure lasting longer, and of course, consider buying flood insurance, which will protect you should there be issues with the coastal infrastructure. So, we've talked about a lot of things today. And you may have questions about where to get resources and who to talk to find out more about the items that were mentioned tonight. There's a list here of the different departments. You can see the Marshfield Building Department, Marshfield Planning Department, CRS Coordinator's Office, the town website, and the CRS website. But please don't lose your investment. Get flood insurance now before the storm. Almost everything we talked about today was of what to do before the storm. When the storm hits, it's too late. And this can be a nor'easter, or as we saw a few weeks ago, it could also be a hurricane or tropical storm. So don't wait. Get prepared today. Reach out to one of the great town experts that are in front of you here today to learn more about protecting you, your property in the town. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody for being here for our wonderful presentation to the town of Marshfield tonight to continue our excellence in CRS. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.